First of all, my name is Yao Niako. I'm the director of NYU Africa House. We're very, very, very grateful to have the SG, His Excellency Wamkele Mene, speak to us. We've been, as some of you may have heard, trying to arrange this for a long time. He's in between meetings, and we're really grateful that you've been able to spare some time to have this fireside chat with us. So I'm just going to ask you some general questions. Our audience just wants to know who you are, what the Continental Free Trade Agreement is, how it can help Africa. So it's really just a conversation. So maybe you can begin. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, your upbringing a little bit, how you got to where you are now, okay?
Thank you very much, Prof, for the invitation. And as you said, this has been in the making for a while now. Yep. And so I'm happy that even with the travel, being in hotels, I'm happy that we were able to find a date that works yes. for both of us. I also want to congratulate you on all the work that you've done at Africa House. My wife went to NYU Law School, and so I had to do this. Otherwise, things would have been very difficult for me at home. So I'm very happy that I want to congratulate you with all the work that you have done.
Thank you.
Well, I am the first Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area.
Yep.
Which is really a remarkable achievement by Africa in the last few years. Yep. Before I took over this position, before I was elected to this position, I was a senior trade negotiator at the Ministry of Trade of South Africa for almost 20 years. And so for better or for worse, all I know is trade agreements, and that's all I've done throughout my career. And it's been a really fulfilling journey and a very, very educational journey to see how trade agreements are potentially transformative, but also how they can destroy livelihoods and how they can destroy industries and decimate industries if they are not structured in the right way. And so I've had the benefit of those experiences that I bring to this position. And in the course of our conversation, I will tell you what it is that I've learned not to do based from previous trade agreements that didn't work, that I negotiated but didn't work. Yes. And why this, I think, in my experience, will be different. So again, thank you for the opportunity.
All right, thank you too. Really good to have you here to have this conversation. So, I'm going to sort of ask you about what is the AfCFTA. Yes. For many of us, I am of the generation when we were born, we were, everything was Pan-Africanism, okay? Mm-hmm. So I definitely am too young, as you are, to have been around during the independence movements. But after yes. independence, my generation is all one Africa, getting us all together to be one continent. So as soon as you mention something, Continental Free Trade Agreement, we're all extremely happy about that. We may not know the details yet, but we're just supportive. It's Africa-wide, it's continent-wide, and we're just happy. So as, springboard to asking you the question. So tell us and tell our audience, what is this thing? What is it supposed to do? And how do we think about it?
Well, that's a great question, and the build up to it was very interesting because for the last 60 years, over 60 years, Africa has, in my mind, achieved the initial political objectives of Kwame Nkrumah, the Organization of African Unity. And the vision was really simple: to unite our continent politically and to end colonialism in Africa. Yep. And that was achieved, in my opinion, with the defeat of apartheid South Africa the country that I'm in today in 1994. But of course, that's not where the mission of the Organization of African Unity, President Kwame Nkrumah and the others, that's not where their vision ended. They wanted market integration also, and an integrated economy on the African continent. But that vision, putting it into practice, really, if we have to be frank with ourselves, and I've been saying this very, very frankly since I was elected, it really did evade us for over 60 years. Because for over 60 years, our economy in Africa has been characterized by market fragmentation, smallness of national economies, lack of economies of scale, lack of productive capacity, shallow industrial output, and this continued reliance on the export of primary commodities to countries of the North, primarily Europe, and lately China, Malaysia, other parts of the world. And so what was clear to our heads of states in the last 10 years or so is that we cannot continue this condition of a continent that is so potentially industrialized and with vast mineral resources, but is the poorest continent in the world. The economic characterization that I set out is in part, we can attribute the condition of Africa today to that. But there is also the lack of industrial capacity and the lack of industrialization, which is something that keeps us in this colonial economic model. And so the heads of state said, let us consolidate this market of 1.3 billion people with a combined GDP of 3.4 trillion United States dollars. Let's consolidate it into what could be one day a globally competitive market by having a free trade area which will make an investment case for intra-Africa as well as outside Africans, very outside investors, make it very compelling to invest in, and also to achieve the objective of eliminating barriers to intra-Africa trade and reducing and eliminating barriers to intra-Africa investment. If you look at our trade patterns as a continent and individual countries in Africa are more trade connected with Europe than we are amongst ourselves as a continent. And all of these things contribute to this very, very low percentage of intra-Africa trade of 18% relative to other regions. North America, intra-North America trade is in excess of 60%. Intra-European trade is in excess of 70%. And so, and that is because of the integration and the consolidation of a single market that other regions of the world have been able to achieve. And their starting point, all of them, their starting point is a free trade area. And then, of course, they gradually graduate to higher degrees, higher levels of industrialization and integration. And so where we are as a continent is really at the lower end of the process of market integration, at the beginning of the process of market integration.
Excellent, excellent. I like the fact that you began by talking about Kwame Nkrumah, and his ambitions didn't end only at the political union, if we will. I remember this line he used to say, seek ye first the political kingdom, and all the rest will be added unto you. So,
yes.
It's a big debate as to whether we've achieved through the AU that political kingdom. But who knows? We may be able to achieve the economic kingdom, even though the political, we are on the way there. So that's one way sometimes I think of the the Continental Free Trade Agreement. If we can, sort of like borrow in a little bit and think through details now. So, what are the kinds of things that happen? What are the kinds of things, if we're now trying to get a little bit concrete as to what the free trade agreement will do? Can you give us some examples? I know some of them, the trade facilitation, and maybe you can also tell us about the payment systems, which I'm really excited about.
So we have a trade agreement that is very comprehensive in scope, that has a depth of liberalization that is envisaged, a depth of market integration that is envisaged. The trade agreement, the AfCFTA, includes, it comprises a number of protocols. So trade in goods, trade in services, intellectual property rights, investment protection and facilitation, competition policy, digital trade, and then recently the heads of states added women and young people in trade. And the idea is that we capture the universe of a country's economic activity. We liberalize trade in services, financial services, excuse me, and other services related and other services sectors that actually can make a contribution to Africa's industrialization. And so it's a really, the ambition in terms of the depth is very, very high. What we are seeking to achieve is that in less than 15 years, that 97% of goods that are traded in Africa shall be traded at zero duty. And that will be combined with elimination of non-tariff barriers, which we know that sometimes, even if you reduce tariffs to zero, as long as those non-tariff measures remain, you will not see the trade liberalization and the boost in trade in the region that you want to see. And then, of course, as I mentioned, there are new areas of economic activity, such as digital trade. And we believe that a protocol on digital trade to set out disciplines for the market, to provide market access so that we consolidate this market as a single market for digital trade is an important aspect of the new global economy. So that's just on the scope of the agreement. Of course, other things, the sort of traditional aspects of trade are there. As you mentioned, trade facilitation, transit of goods. We've agreed on rules for transit of goods. We've agreed on harmonization of customs procedures. These really sort of traditional, classical trade agreement provisions are there, embedded in the agreement.
Right. So if I can just, the thing you just mentioned is so important. I just want you to just stay on that for just a second. So sure. The cynic, the person who thinks that this is all, talking, they would say, if you go to our borders, going from one country to another, my home country, Ghana, to Burkina Faso, to Togo, to Cote d'Ivoire, you've got checkpoints. It's very, very difficult to send things back and forth. So if we haven't been able to do any of that, how can we talk about these grand things? So if you can, I know you guys have done a lot of good work there. So I just wanted for you to tell our audiences all of your good work in that area.
Your critics would be right. They would be right. If we just take for a moment what you've mentioned, where with the exception of Burkina, on the Abidjan-Lagos corridor, a distance of a little over 1,000 kilometers, there are 37 checkpoints that exist, and they come in various forms. They are customs, they are security, they are police, they are soldiers. And these are the things that the trade agreement seeks to address. And so we have a massive challenge ahead of us to make sure that countries adhere to the obligations that they undertook when they ratified the agreement. And so what we've done, we've been we've been around as a secretariat for less than a year, less than 2 years rather. And then we had COVID in the middle of that for about 18 months or so. But here's what we've been able to do in the last 6 months. We have been working with customs authorities, identifying exactly where the constraints are to transit of goods, smooth and efficient transit of goods through the borders, particularly in countries that are at the core of trade corridors. The countries that I've just mentioned, Togo, for example, is very important for Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, because Togo has a port, a very, very efficient and well-run port. And so these countries that are landlocked, they rely on efficient transit corridors so that they can have access to the ports and the goods. And so we are working to identify where are these challenges, why do they exist? There are pockets of success in Africa. If you look at East Africa, for example, a few years ago in East Africa, 5-6 years ago, it would take about 7 days for goods to transit from Port of Mombasa to Kampala. It now takes less than 2 days for that transit of the same truck. And that is because of the interventions that the trade agreement, the East African community, the regional trade agreements, the concrete interventions that they made in customs procedures digitization, for example, in introducing soft and hard infrastructure along the borders. And these are things that are quick wins, relatively quick wins, and they are not pie in the sky ideas. They've been done in other parts of the continent. Another example that I can give you, goods can transit from Zambia, from the northeastern part of Zambia, all the way to the port of Durban in South Africa, again in less than 2 days, clearing 3 countries. So we know that there are models of success that we can build on as we implement this trade agreement. And so whilst your critics are correct that there are these challenges, particularly in West Africa and Central Africa, we also know that there are positive success stories in other parts of the continent, particularly when it comes to goods that are in transit.
Excellent, excellent. Let me ask you just 2 quick, areas which I think are not part of your mandate, but I'm going to ask you anyway because I think it impinges on it. So the first one is currency. And so one of the big difficulties in trading is just, the currency you're going to use, having to change things from the CFA to the CD to the Naira. And in West Africa, at least, there was an attempt for the ECHO. It came up, but didn't quite go anywhere. So any quick comments on that? My understanding is that that's not part of your mandate, but what are your thoughts? What are your views? How does this impinge upon the free trade agreement?
It's not part of our mandate. However, we know that because on the African continent, we have over 42 currencies, that when you want to trade not only across regions, but sometimes between Togo and Ghana, the cost of currency convertibility is significant. The cost of converting the Ghanaian cedi, the Nigerian naira to the dollar for a counterparty who is in Kenya, the counterparty receives the US dollar and then they have to convert it to the Kenyan shilling. And we estimate that this costs, this cost to the African economy is to the tune of $5 billion a year. And more importantly, it renders our economic activity and our trade very costly, inefficient, and uncompetitive relative to regions that that have a common currency. And so clearly, if we want to boost intra-Africa trade, we must address this question of the cost of currency convertibility. I won't even go to the issue of a single currency in Africa, because that's not our mandate. And in any case, it comes with a range of very, very difficult macroeconomic convergence challenges that would have to be addressed over a sustained period of time. We know this from the experience of Europe.
Yep.
However, what we are doing, working very closely with AfCFTA, we are introducing the Pan-African payments and settlement system, in terms of which AfCFTA is working with us to build the technology, build the platform, so that you as a trader can use a digital platform to transact with your counterparty. You are in Nigeria, they are in Kenya. And the example that I've just made is that cost to you in terms of in monetary value, as well as in efficiency and competitiveness. That cost to you in efficiency, competitiveness, and affordability of trade on the continent is actually now going to be almost eliminated, I would say. And so what AfCFTA have done, and I really have a lot of admiration for this, they've put aside over $1 billion and said this $1 billion will be for liquidity for the payments system, so that the settlement can happen. And then, of course, the infrastructure is being built at the same time. Where we come in as a strategic partner is to provide the overarching legal framework for this to happen. So in other words, we are providing the legal anchor, which was not there before. The AfCFTA is the first continental legal framework that we have for commerce on the African continent. And I believe that it will significantly reduce the costs of doing business and the cost of trade on the African continent. We're piloting it in 6 countries in West Africa. And I'm very excited about the feedback so far, which has been very, very positive. We're not going to exclude anybody else from setting up their own payments platform, Continental payments platform. And the regulations that will underpin this, the legal framework that will underpin this, will be technology neutral. Yep. We are not going to determine and dictate to you what technology you use, who the investor should be. We simply are saying this is the first step that we have taken as a continent to addressing this very, very difficult challenge that has existed for the last 60 years.
Thank you. I'm so glad you mentioned Africa Export-Import Bank. We've had
yes.
Dr. Benedict Orama come to speak at NYU a number of times. So
okay.
Yeah, I'm really glad.
They are a very, very strong partner of ours.
Excellent and great work. So anyway, that was one issue, currency. Let me ask you a second issue. This too, I don't think is in your mandate, but I'm going to ask you anyway. So the whole issue of movement of people, okay,
yes.
From one country to another country. So to do trade, oftentimes you need to go to the place, okay? So there are 2 aspects of that. One, of course, is just visas and passports and things like that. I believe it's not part of your mandate, but probably very important. European Union, when they brought in the Schengen, it made trade facilitation much better. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is the movement of people. So if you want to set up shop in another country to start your own company, how easy it is. As you know, Ghana and Nigeria have had over the past decades problems with small-scale farmers, small-scale traders coming in each other's country. So it's a flashpoint. So I just wanted to ask you your views on movement of people now as a constraint. And again, my understanding is it's not part of your mandate, but very important for your mandate.
Yes, absolutely. It has a direct impact on our mandate. Yep. There is a protocol on movement of persons, which is now under the African Union. And unfortunately, only about 10 or 11 countries have ratified that protocol,
Yeah.
there's a great deal of sensitivity on movement of persons, and they're related to immigration issues, unrelated, in my view, to trade and commerce. And so my observation, and I think this is the underlying point in the premise in your question, the observation is that many African countries are very apprehensive about moving in the direction of enabling movement of free movement of natural persons. What we have taken account of that. We realize the political realities, the political constraints. And so what we've built into the agreement is a step that would one day take us to free movement of persons in Africa. And that is, we have, in the protocol on trading services, we have built into it a movement of business persons. So that if you are trading under the AfCFTA, you are allowed to move freely within the continent in the context of the trade agreement. So we don't want to touch immigration law because we understand the sensitivities. We understand that it will take time before everybody is of the same mind. However, from a trade point of view, what is it that we can do? And I believe that allowing movement of business persons, whether it's consultants, whether it is CEOs of companies, this is a very, very important step that we must take if we want to contribute to boosting intra-Africa trade. The good news is this: the agreement has entered into force with this provision that enables movement of business persons. So it is already there in the agreement as a first step towards one day having free movement of natural persons.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, thank you. That's a very, very, very smart thing to do, wise thing to do, and as you said, it's getting around a larger problem. So thank you for sharing that with us. Let me move to another question for you. And as I read many of the things that you write, I see the word industrialization come in often. Today, as you speak, industrialization. Many countries, and if I'm not mistaken, you're based in Ghana, and the Ghanaian Ministry of Trade is actually MOTI, Ministry of Trade and Industrialization. So there's a sense that the more you trade, the more likely you are to get your industries built. So can you say something about that? So those people who they want Africa to industrialize, but maybe they're missing out on the trade angle and having trade be part of it. So over to you on that.
Well, let me start answering that question where we began our conversation. We export primary commodities, continue to, over the last 60 years, this over-reliance on the export of primary commodities that have not been processed.
Right.
We export about $6 billion worth of raw coffee, which gets processed outside of the African continent and eventually contributes to $100 billion coffee industry after processing outside of the continent. Same thing with smartphones. You can get here on the African continent the minerals that are required to manufacture a smartphone. The smartphone eventually sells for close to $1,000, depending on the model. And so, but the very, very important minerals that are required for that small cell phone, we don't process them. The value chain, both in these examples that I've mentioned, we lose out on the value chain as a result of this lack of industrial capacity. Now, we will not be able to boost intra-Africa trade amongst one another as a continent if we continue to trade apples for apples, oranges for oranges. So we must achieve a degree of trade specialization that will require that we must do value addition, we must do proper processing of the goods that we manufacture on the African continent. It is happening in a very, very small scale, but we have to make sure that it happens at a continental scale. If one day we want to be as a larger contributor to global trade, to global output, to global merchandise, if one day as a continent we want to contribute over 6% to global trade and global output, as Singapore does, a single country, an island, and the 55 of us, African countries, because of this colonial economic model that we have sustained over a period of time, we contribute less than 3% to global trade and output. If we want to get out of this condition, we must make sure that we take the steps towards industrialization. And we've identified a number of sectors that we think should be the appropriate starting point for continental value chains, not individual countries, but continental value chains, pharmaceuticals, the auto sector, agro-processing, agriculture. These are very, very important sectors of Africa's economy, where we actually, if we establish the right legal framework, which is what this agreement is, it establishes the appropriate legal framework, it then enables us to attract investment in these productive sectors and in these productive value chains. It's going to take time. I mean, I'm not naive to think that it will happen in 10, 15 years. We know from the experience of countries that have industrialized that there is actually no shortcut to industrialization, particularly in a continent such as ours, where we want to create jobs for young Africans so that they stop dying and being buried deep in the oceans of the Mediterranean as they search for better lives in Europe. So it's going to take us time, right, but we must start somewhere. And we must start with a trade agreement that enables this industrialization to happen.
Okay. So, I mean, thank you so much for mentioning those key areas. Let me pick one of the three just to push it a little bit. It's an area that I have been working in and I'm very passionate about. And so this is the agro-processing area, okay? Mm-hmm. So I've been working a lot with smallholder farmers, trying to boost their production. And when you look at companies who are trying to, agro-processing companies, they will tell you, surprisingly, that a big constraint to their enlarging their businesses, maybe it's a fruit juice company, maybe it's a flour mill, the inputs are erratic, okay? Mm-hmm. And so sometimes they're looking for flour to make, they're looking for maize to make flour. And Ghana, where you are headquartered right now, as you know, had a big drought in November, and there's no maize on the market, okay? Mm-hmm. And so it would have been great if you could automatically bring in maize from other countries, all right? Yes. As you know, Nigeria for a long time banned the import of agricultural products into Nigeria. They wanted to protect their own farmers. So I don't know if you have any comments on this, but for me, that would be an area where there's an immediate advantage to having the free trade agreement. If maize farmers in Nigeria can ship them to Ghana when Ghana has floods and the prices are the prices of maize today is twice as high as just 12 months ago. And so this is an area where I think would have a great, impact. So anyway, any comments on that?
Well, there's a legal component to that, and there's also an economic component. Let me start with the legal component. Yeah. We are now, in terms of this agreement, we are now prohibiting, we're prohibiting blanket export restrictions. So you will now no longer be able to say, you know what, I don't like country X anymore. We will restrict exports to country X. They are, of course, just like in any legal agreement, whether it's a contract, there are exceptions. There may be exceptions related to food security or public health, but the general rule is that you will no longer be able to just wake up and say, we are no longer exporting to this particular country. And again, that's an important development. The second important component of the point you make is that in the establishment of a continental free trade area, you now will have continental value chains. So these agricultural products should, under the agreement, they should be able to move to other parts of the continent, where you have leather processing capacity in Ethiopia. Ethiopia should be able now, under the agreement, to supply and to provide agro-processing capacity or products throughout the African continent without these restrictions, which were discriminatory, and in many cases, which were arbitrary, and which were never really litigated in terms of assessing their merits, whether it is for public health or whether it is for food security. These were just arbitrary measures that various governments were taking. And so now we're making it much easier for these goods and these products to transit across borders, across the African continent, in a way that is legally consistent with the agreement itself.
Excellent. Okay, let me move to another. So again, I'm asking you questions that when I'm a big fan of the Continental Free Trade Agreement, but there are skeptics, as you know, and I'm just pointing out some of the things the skeptics have said. And so one of them I have a series of questions around this. One of them is, you imagine somebody who's trying to start a business in one country, okay? So you pick your favorite country, and forming businesses in Africa is extremely difficult. You've got the paperwork you have to deal with. In many cases, you need to see a government minister. The minister will tell you, go, come back. So it's just so hard to get your business processes complete. Now we're saying, not only do you need to do it in one country, but perhaps in two countries to facilitate the trade between the two of them, right? So my general question to you is, are you doing anything on trade facilitation? If somebody needs to go to another country, how does your office help with that?
Well, maybe let me just say, for precision, even in the most integrated region in the world, you still have to be locally incorporated. You still have to be subject to local regulations, whether you're a business or a bank. The domestic regulation continues to be a very, very strong pillar of within the European Union even itself. So just for us to be precise, there's no trade agreement that tries to replace national regulation or national policy. The trade agreement for a region or for a number of countries is intended to complement the national efforts. And so we have to be very cautious not to appear as if we want to take over the mandate of national regulators or ministries of trade, nor should we be seen, or their perception, nor should there be a perception that we are actually granting ourselves authority that we don't have. So we have to be extremely careful. Otherwise, these governments that we have to work with will tell us you are acting outside of your mandate. The practical steps that we are taking are this. We are designing a digital platform with our very strong partner, Afreximbank, which in due course will be live. It's called Africa Trade Gateway. So you will now be in Malawi. You will, through the digital platform, you will be able to make an assessment of the market in East Africa or North Africa. The digital platform will have due diligence information about your potential counterparty. It will have rules of origin, market information, that is required. And then, of course, the Pan-African payments and settlement system that we talked about will be part of this digital platform. So we are now creating an interconnectivity of small, medium enterprises primarily, because the big corporations, they are fine. They can enter new markets very, very easily. They have the capacity. But small, medium enterprises will need for us to facilitate their access into the new markets, so that East Africa and West Africa is integrated, and as well as other parts of other regions of the continent. If we're not able to achieve, and this, again, for me, this is a quick win. It's not one of these very, very difficult things to do. We can now leverage on digital platforms to get this done, to get this business interconnectivity to happen, to get markets primarily of small, medium enterprises to be presented with new markets. And so we have to take a balancing act between respecting domestic regulation and at the same time the imperative for enabling accessing of new markets via small, medium enterprises.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you for saying that. And one last question along those lines, and maybe you'll say that it's unimportant. Again, this is to the cynics, okay? And so they usually talk about, the language issues, okay, between African nations. I usually joke that if you look at West Africa, at least, okay, it's almost as if when the British came, they carved out all the areas where there are rivers. So River Gambia, River Volta, River Niger, made them English speaking. Gave the French everything else, cut borders across tribes. So in some sense, we've got a major language problem across the continent. And so do you think that that's a barrier to trade, or do you think that, people will just figure it out? In other words, what do you say to the cynics?
Well, I think people will figure it out. There's no single language in Europe.
Yep.
And yet Europe has an intra-regional trade, intra-EU trade percentage of 72%, which is the highest in the world. So you move from Holland into Belgium. There's Flemish, there's French, but the trade is happening. I think what is required is the infrastructure, the trade enabling infrastructure, whether it's hard or soft infrastructure, harmonization of customs systems. I was surprised that there are countries that are neighbors in our continent, and yet their customs systems are not interoperable. Their customs systems don't talk to each other. I'm not talking in the sense of language. I mean, so that a customs officer will know how many trucks are coming, what those trucks are bringing across the border. Those technologies don't exist. Yeah. And now I believe with digital platforms, we now have the capacity to do all of that. And that is, over time, that will create an environment where we overcome the differences in language. If we have the right infrastructure, the right digital platforms, and of course the right attitude of our customs authorities, I think these are important ingredients to boosting trade across the continent.
All right. Let me move to any fears that you may have for the future. And before I ask that, I sort of want to commend you, the organizers, the people who promoted it, because I remember as, ratification, we were waiting for ratification. What I read in the newspapers, I don't know if it was true, but for example, Nigeria waited for a long time to ratify. And
yes.
What we read in the newspapers was that Nigeria wanted to protect its own industries, okay, from competition from other countries. So the fact that today everybody has signed, we got to congratulate you, congratulate all the people who worked for this. It's a big deal, okay? We were able to surmount all of these problems. So I wanted to commend you for that. But in addition, just looking forward, what are the things you're worried about? So if you have countries that are nervous about how their economies are going to fare when you have opened up trade, what kind of issues do you think you'll be facing down the road?
Well, the good thing is, and the positive news is that we now have 40 countries that have ratified the agreement, which is the fastest instrument to be ratified under the African Union. And so that's very, very encouraging. And when I talk to heads of state, some of them say to me, I have not yet ratified, but the process in Parliament is ongoing. We were delayed by COVID-19. But she will say to me, rest assured that my country is committed to the AfCFTA. The second point I would make is that, yes, of course, naturally, countries have to work through the domestic process, private sector consultations with civil society, so that everybody is comfortable that the agreement is not going to decimate the industry, will not lead to job losses, but rather will lead to job creation. So all of these things in different countries take time. And then, of course, different countries have different legal systems. So I'm not worried that we still have countries that have not ratified. In fact, based on my experience as a trade negotiator, I'm very, very pleasantly surprised that in such a short space of time, we've had 40 countries ratifying the AfCFTA. There are concerns and in my visits, I address these concerns about transshipment of goods from third countries outside of Africa. There are concerns about dumping of goods. There are concerns about, subsidized goods being exported, causing import surges. All of these things are very, very important concerns and legitimate concerns. But here is many private sector people I talk to, they don't know that we have built safeguards into the agreement. For example, if there's a sudden import surge in your country of a particular product, you have legal rights under the agreement. You can assert those rights, and the process can begin to mitigate this sudden rise in import surges. Your country is undergoing macroeconomic imbalances, a balance of payments challenge. There again, we've built into the agreement particular flexibilities. And so what I've realized is that the more I travel and talk to the private sector, the more awareness I have to do and the more advocacy I have to do, because private sector, they don't know that there are provisions to safeguard against dumping of products. And so it is work in progress. It's a large continent. It's not possible for me to be in every country at every moment. And so it's going to take time for us to work through some of those concerns.
All right. And you were saying earlier on about countries which are supportive but are in the process. I think your home country, South Africa, is in that position, right?
Well, South Africa ratified over a year ago.
A year ago, okay. All right.
Yes, South Africa ratified over a year ago. Nigeria ratified in December. In fact, South Africa ratified when I was still working for South Africa.
Okay.
As a senior trade negotiator. But what is important is that we have a strong critical mass of countries who will aggressively implement the agreement. Even when the integration process started in Europe, it started with 6-7 countries, 72 years ago. Yeah. And we are starting with 41 countries. And so I don't expect that each and every single country will move in the same speed as others. What we require are 10, 12 countries to start the process of implementation in a really commercially meaningful sense. And so that we start to see the trade flows that will make this agreement successful.
Excellent, excellent. Well, you're speaking to a university audience. You know, a lot of very bright students and faculty listening into you. And you know, I'm a big supporter of everything you do. One question for you is, how are you dealing with measurement? In other words, it would be great to document the impact of all these wonderful things you are doing, and that's why we have our students and professors on this call here. So, can you speak to that?
Well, we will require all the expertise that we can get for measuring success. For example, in about a year's time, I would like us to be able to trace trade flows since the agreement entered into force. Has there been a difference? Have we seen 1% increase, 2% increase? If we say that we want to double intra-Africa trade by the year 2035, what percentage are we seeing in different regions? What kind of trade patterns are we seeing developing from the trade agreement? I think this treasure of data and research capacity would be very, very helpful. We don't have it. In fact, I'm not aware that there's a secretariat that has that kind of research capacity, maybe the WTO to an extent, but generally because of resource constraints, it's very, very difficult to have a research, a trade research capacity that will enable you to make an ongoing assessment of whether you are succeeding or not, jobs that are being created. Today, I was on a call with a bank, and they told me that they want, their estimates are that if they invest in 5 million small, medium enterprises, they will create X number of jobs as a result of investing in these small, medium enterprises that will be trading under the AfCFTA. So there's so much data that we require, and there's so much that we don't know. Many of us in the Secretariat are trade law experts. And so there are quite a number of expertise that we do not have. And so this is where I see room for future collaboration as we implement this agreement.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, I know many of our faculty and students are working in that general area. I think the United Nations UNCTAD, United Nations
Yes.
Conference on Trade and Development, they collect a lot of data. We're actually working with them. They're having the World Investment Forum. It's taking place in about a couple of weeks. Yes, and the report. Yeah. And we're collaborating with them on that. So for our students and our faculty, that's a place we can collaborate. So I think we're getting to the end of our talk now. We've been talking for about an hour now, which is usually the limit of a Zoom call. So in terms of closing remarks for our students, for our faculty, anything you want to say, or just, you know, to the NYU community, New York community, and broader community listening?
Yeah. What I would say to the broader community is I am the first one to admit where the continent of Africa has made mistakes in the past. We are well aware of the mistakes that we made, and to bring that acknowledgement closer to a trade agreement. I also know where trade agreements, the reasons why they did not work. On this continent, they did not work because of lack of trade finance capacity. If you open a market, if you enable small, medium enterprises to reach a new market, you have to provide them with the trade support that they need. So that's been very, very limited on our continent. I'm very happy that Afreximbank has come on board, and we are now working together to mobilize a trade finance facility that will enable our small, medium enterprises and young entrepreneurs to benefit from this agreement. We also know from your experience in North America, which brought about Donald Trump, that if you don't have inclusivity in trade agreements, if you don't have the young people and often vulnerable segments of society seeing the benefits of the trade agreement, the perception will be that it benefits only the elite and the big corporations, and jobs are being shifted off to Mexico. Of course, it was a very, very artificial analysis, but from an electoral point of view, it's very, very appealing, which is why we saw in part an electoral victory from a Donald Trump who said trade agreements benefit only the elite. Yeah. So the second lesson that I'm learning from that is that we must make sure that we have inclusive benefits of this agreement. And that's why I want us to focus on small, medium enterprises so that we prevented Donald Trump from ever popping up somewhere in Africa who will say, yeah, you see, the AfCFTA created benefits only for the elite and the big corporations in Africa.
Excellent. Very, very well said. I completely agree with you on SMEs. As I said, we're doing some work with UN UNCTAD with our conference, and one of the big sort of like main themes are SMEs. So I'm just really glad that you're saying that. Okay. You know, I wish we could have had this in person in New York City. Okay, that was the original plan, but because of COVID, we have to have it, you know, on Zoom. So I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for making the time. I know it's in between a number of meetings that you're having and that you're very, very busy. I'll be in Ghana soon. I'll knock on your door and come and say hello to you. Okay. But just on behalf of everybody on the list here, on behalf of all of Africa House, all of NYU, all of United States, all of the greater group of people who are listening to this, thank you so much for coming. We've been aiming to have this for a long time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof, for having me. It's been a really enjoyable discussion. And very, very thought-provoking questions from you and the audience, of course. And this is what I expect, is that we must, I don't expect praise singers. If I want a praise singer, I'll go to my village. But we expect a critique of what we are doing and a constructive critique of what we are doing. That's the only way we can make progress. And so I'm very grateful for the opportunity to have had this interaction. I very much look forward to us meeting when you are next in Accra. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, and God bless. And really, we're really grateful, Your Excellency, for coming here and talking to us today.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye.